topic this morning in Hebrews 13:4. If we go to the next slide, this is what Hebrews 13:4 says. It says, marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled, for fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Now, the English words here, marriage bed, translate the biblical Greek word koite, from which we get our English word coitus, right? Which means, I won't make anybody say it, copulation. It means sexual intercourse. And then the word fornicators actually translates the original biblical Greek root pornos, which is where we get our English root word porn. And so the Bible itself has brought us to the topics of marriage, coitus, porn, and adultery, all in one verse. And so I really didn't have a choice but to deal with the topic of sexuality now. I could have skipped this verse, but some of you probably would have caught me and said, you know, Kent, you have been basically preaching through the entire book of Hebrews, verse by verse, but you sort of skipped 13:4. You know, what's up with that? And that brings me to one aspect of my resistance, is I've been hesitant to address the topic of sexuality because I feel that my voice as a pastor and teacher is out of sync with other Christian voices. Let me explain what I mean by that. For a very long time, and by very long time, I mean for dozens and dozens, 50, hundreds of years perhaps, the Christian perspective, the church's message with regard to the topic of sexuality, I believe was unhealthily and unbiblically prudish and uptight. Some of you know what I'm talking about. If anything was even voiced about sexuality from a Christian perspective, it was essentially sex bad, right? But with the so-called sexual revolution that has transpired in the United States over the last 50 years, the church in time, I should say, began to voice a more biblical and a healthier perspective on sexuality. However, in recent years, and this is just my opinion, in recent years, I think we've been seeing the church, rather than continuing to articulate a healthy and biblical perspective on sexuality, I think we've been seeing the church begin to cater to a cultural obsession with sex. I think we've been seeing the church cater to a cultural obsession with sex. And I've seen some churches that have done message series that are just way over the top. And series that just strike me as being marketing gimmicks, because sex sells, right? We know that in the United States, sex sells. And so I find myself biblically and pastorally in a different place, and I feel out of sync. I think the pendulum in the church has swung from prudishness about sex to obsession with sex. We swung from the demonization of sex to catering to our cultural idolization of sex. And coitus is not the most important thing in the world, though our culture says that it is. And I believe that as Christians, we're being dragged in our thinking and even more critically in our living towards that unbiblical, unhealthy position way on the other side of the pendulum swing. And biblically speaking, sex just ain't all that. It's just not all that. The words of Hebrews 13:4 actually articulate a balanced perspective on sex, somewhere between the pendulum extremes, and it articulates that balanced perspective in the two words, honor and undefiled. So there is honor, Hebrews 13:4 tells us, in marriage, in the act of marriage. There is honor in coitus. So let's not demonize it. Let's not shut it down. Let's not shut it up. But neither let us defile, is the other word here. Let us not defile the marriage bed by cheapening sex, nor by idolizing it and trying to make it into something way more important than God meant for it to be. Because again, biblically speaking, taken from a biblical perspective, coitus is not the most important thing in the world. Sex is just not all that. And yet then I'm hesitant to make that statement You're kind of seeing why I'm so psychotic on this whole thing. I'm hesitant to make that statement that sex just ain't all that because pastorally, I know that many marriages, too many marriages, languish from unhealthy, dysfunctional, and even frigid sex lives. And so I'm concerned that in making that statement, one of you might use that statement then to perpetuate just unhealthiness and brokenness in your marital intimacy. Well, Pastor said sex ain't all that, right? Pastor said the Bible even said that sex ain't all that, right? So you see my dilemma. And you see why I'm just so confused about sex for many reasons. But in spite of my confusion and hesitancy and being out of sync, so the Bible has dragged me and dragged us kicking and screaming to this topic this morning. And this morning is really going to serve just as introductory material to the next 3 weeks. In Hebrews 13:4, these words are really going to serve as the template and a springboard into laying a foundation for healthy biblical, an understanding of healthy biblical sexuality. And so I want to begin by, I guess really my objective is to open our eyes in whatever ways our eyes need to be open towards our cultural perspective on sex. I want to open our eyes to what we have been inundated with and saturated with, and we may not even be aware of it. And so I want to ask this question, and is it fair to say, as I have, that our culture is sexually obsessed? We're obsessed with sex. Because there are a lot of voices that say that the sexual revolution in the United States actually liberated America from antiquated mores of religious sexual prudishness. So are we obsessed or are we liberated? Are we obsessed or have we been emancipated? I say we're obsessed. We're obsessed. And we're so obsessed that we're in fact the opposite of liberated. We are in bondage to sex culturally. And now that statement, I know, sounds like a pretty objective opinion. Well, that's what you think, Kent, right? So what I wanted to do initially at this point in the message was as to offer objective proofs of the statement that culturally we're obsessed with sex. We're out of control obsessed with sex. And so I wanted to overwhelm you with statistics of just the shocking increase over the last 50 years of promiscuity, of infidelity, of pornography, of sexual abuse, of sexual assaults, the staggering proliferation of the sex trafficking industry, even right here in the United States. Individuals being abducted and held captive in sex trafficking industry. Sex slaves, right here in the United States. It's staggering. And even just the statistics on the increase of just the average number of sex acts, the average TV viewer watches in an evening of primetime television. All right, but I decided I'm not going to bore you with the statistics. I don't need to go there, right? We all know what the statistics would say. They would scream the fact that we're a culture that's just out of control, obsessed with sex. So I thought this analogy would be a more fun way to prove the point, more fun than boring statistics. And I'm offering this to you as a way to make the statement that we're out of control, obsessed with sex, as an objective fact, okay? So just go along for this little ride with me. Some of you may remember I actually used this analogy about 10 years ago, I think. So imagine getting on an airplane and you're going to fly to a country that you've never, ever been to before. And you pull the magazine, the in-flight magazine out of the seat in front of you, and you leaf through it, and on every page there's like a picture of chocolate cake. And there's articles about chocolate cake, and there's even like a chocolate cake centerfold. Right? And then when you watch the in-flight movie and it just contains scene after scene after scene of people eating chocolate cake. And then when you land in the country, the streets are just lined with billboards of chocolate cake. And there's stores, there's like novelty stores of chocolate cake. And there are bars that have chocolate cake shows. And every song on the radio, you listen to the radio, it's like all these songs are about chocolate cake. And all the TV commercials try to sell you everything by connecting it with chocolate cake. If you buy this car, if you drink this beverage, if you wear this perfume, you'll get more chocolate cake. right? And you go to the grocery store and the magazines on the checkout line are all feature articles like 50 ways to have mind-blowing chocolate cake. Right? I could go on, but you get the idea. I think that any American would visit that culture and say, now, don't get me wrong, I like chocolate cake as much as the next guy, but you're all seriously hung up on chocolate cake, right? Right? Nobody would say, well, that's your opinion. It's like, no, this is an opinion. Seriously, you guys have issues with chocolate cake. It's as plain as the nose on your face. That's an objective matter of fact, right? Well, guess what? We're that culture. Everything I detailed in that analogy is the way we are. We are that culture, only it's not chocolate cake, it's sex. We're seriously hung up on sex. And it honestly could not be more plain to see, but we've become so desensitized as a culture, and I think even desensitized as a church. We're desensitized to our obsession with sex because of just the ubiquity of sex, the just everywhere present obsession with sex in our culture. You know, to the point that, like the proverbial frog in a kettle, you all know the analogy, that we can't even see the obvious fact that's boiling around us. We're out of control, obsessed with sex. We've got issues. We really have issues. Now don't get me wrong. Now, I need to say, I am not a prude. I like chocolate cake as much as the next guy, right? Okay? And I'm not saying as a church that we need to go back to sex bad. But, you know, I do feel the need as a pastor to rescue our perspective and our practices as Christ followers from being swept away in this cultural tide, this cultural riptide of obsession with sex, from being swept away in this cultural deception that says sex is all that. It's not. And so that brings us then to really the heart of what, you know, I want to communicate this morning by way of introduction to this question: why is it that we're so obsessed with sex? Why is it that in the heart of our culture and maybe in the hearts of us individually right here this morning, why is it that we've become so obsessed with sex? This is the statement: we are obsessed with sex because we have confused spiritual intimacy with sexual intensity. I've got this statement here. I want us to read this together. It might be a little bit uncomfortable, but let's say this. We are obsessed with sex because we have confused spiritual intimacy with sexual intensity. Well, what does that mean? Well, first of all, God created us. God created the human race. God created you, to personalize it, for spiritual intimacy. That's what this means. Intimacy means to fully know the Lord and be fully, completely known by Him. To fully love the Lord and to be fully loved by Him. And then also to fully know others and to be completely, fully known by others. To completely love others and to be completely loved by others. That is spiritual intimacy. And God created us. God Himself created us with this legitimate need. He put into us this God craving in our soul for this deep spiritual and emotional connection with Him and with others. And so God created us with the need for spiritual intimacy. Now I want to talk about that more in a moment. But we've confused that as a culture. We've confused that. We've confused our need for spiritual intimacy, our need for a deeply meaningful emotional connection. And we've confused that with sexual intensity, a passing physical sensation. We have sexualized our God-given need for intimacy. And so as a result of wrongly believing that the buzzes and the tingles of the human body satisfy the deepest longings of the human soul, we're driven then towards sexual experience. We're driven towards sexual release. We're driven towards sexual encounter and sexual conquest. We're preoccupied with sexual satisfaction because we believe that sexual satisfaction will satisfy our souls. We're seeking for God, but we've settled for sex. There was an article on CNN, mind you, of all places recently, from which I actually stole the title of this message. I stole the title from a CNN article. That should shock you. The author of the article, Shannon Ethridge, was writing to explain the popularity of the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy. On CNN, this is what author Shannon Ethridge wrote. Did I mention on CNN wrote this article? Our society is clamoring for closeness. However, in the absence of genuine intimacy, we settle for sexual intensity, erotica, pornography, an office romance, an extramarital affair, or whatever strokes the ego and provides the sexual high we crave. I suggest that sexual intensity is simply not the same as intimacy. Listen to this. I think this is brilliant. I suggest that sexual intensity is not the same as intimacy. If it were, then prostitutes and porn stars would be the most emotionally and relationally fulfilled people on the planet. That doesn't seem to be the case, she writes. So if we have a legitimate God-given need for intimacy, but we've confused our need for intimacy with sexual intensity, then how do we get the wires uncrossed? How do we become unconfused about something that God actually built into us as a legitimate need, a legitimate desire? Well, to answer that question, we need to go back to the very beginning, to a passage of Scripture that I continually revisit, as some of you know, because it's so fundamental to our understanding of ourselves. It's Genesis 2:25, where we read the familiar words, "Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame." The first man, the first woman, they were both naked, but they felt no shame. As some of you have heard me teach before, these words mean more than the fact that the man and the woman weren't embarrassed about being physically exposed. This is about more than just nudity here. It means that everything about the woman and everything about the man was exposed. Their naked thoughts, their naked feelings, their naked dreams, their naked desires. The whole of their naked self was exposed to the other, and they were known before God. They were known before others, and yet they felt no shame because they were experiencing love and acceptance and commitment of the naked self by the naked other. Does that make sense? It's more than just naked bodies. It's the whole naked self, and that's spiritual intimacy. That's God's original blueprint for authentic spiritual intimacy, and that's the true need of your soul. It's the true need of my soul that God himself built into us. For the naked self to know and be known, and for the naked self to love and be loved, and for the naked self to accept and be accepted by God and others. Now, doesn't that sound right to you? Doesn't that just sound right in your heart? It should, because I think many of us can identify with this as being one of the most fundamental questions we always ask. It's, if you really knew me, if you knew who I really am, would you still love me, right? That's the quest for authentic, God-designed spiritual intimacy. If you really knew the good, bad, and even the ugly stuff about me, would you still love me? Would you still accept me? And would you still continue to love and accept me? Would you stand by me even as you discover more and more of the good and the bad and the ugly? So that is one of the deepest longings of our hearts, because that's what God built into us, the need for spiritual intimacy. But spiritual intimacy, authentic spiritual intimacy, is hard work, as you know. It's difficult to love, and it's especially difficult to continue to love and accept the bad and the ugly in one another, right? It's hard to love the whole naked self, the whole naked other. It's like, oh, I've seen the naked you ugly. Right? I've seen your naked thoughts. Some of them are pretty stupid. I've seen some of your naked emotions. You should not feel those things. I've seen your naked bad. I've seen the worst of you naked. And I despise those parts of you. I've seen even your best. I've seen your naked best. And it's not good enough. Yeah, I've seen the naked you ugly. And I'm out of here, right? Some of us know some of those. And so how do we react to these breakdowns in God's design for authentic spiritual intimacy? Well, we react in the same way that the first man and the first woman reacted when God's design for intimacy, authentic intimacy, broke down. We're ashamed of our naked selves. We're ashamed of what people now know about us and have seen in us, and so we hide. We hide from God. We hide from others, behind fig leaves of various kinds of construction, right? And then, like the first man and the woman, we then see the naked other and we despise them, we reject them, we blame them. And so this is then the result when there's breakdown in God's blueprint for authentic spiritual intimacy. And so instead of knowing and being known, we hide from others and others hide from us. We hold others at arm's length, and we are held at arm's length. We play to others. You know what I mean? We put on a front, and others play to us. It's all ways of hiding. Instead of loving and being loved, we despise and are despised. Instead of accepting and being accepted, we reject and are rejected. Instead of committing to and being committed to, we betray and get betrayed. And all of us know some of those too. Authentic spiritual intimacy is hard work. Love, acceptance, and commitment of the naked self to the naked others is really hard work. But do you want to know what's really easy? Sex. Sex is really easy. Anybody can do it, and most everybody is. Because sex creates the illusion. Listen to this. Sex creates the illusion that when naked body meets naked body, then the naked self in its entirety has met the naked other in its entirety. Does that make sense? It creates the illusion that authentic disclosure has taken place. And authentic, wholehearted, whole naked self acceptance has taken place. Sex creates the illusion then that the deepest needs of the human soul for authentic spiritual connection have been satisfied by mere physical connection. Sex creates the illusion that love, acceptance, and commitment have been exchanged in the mere entangling of arms and legs. But it hasn't. It hasn't. A naked body is not the naked self. Do you understand what I mean? The difference? A physically naked body is not an emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, the whole naked self. And so therefore, pleasuring another person's naked body is not loving the whole naked other. Accepting another's naked body is not accepting the whole naked other. And certainly a few moments of persistence in physical gratification is not persistence in unconditionally committing to and accepting the other person for the long haul. They're just simply not the same. And that's why we're looking for God, but we've settled for sex. And that's why we're obsessed. That's why we're out of control obsessed with sex, because we're looking for something to satisfy our souls, but we've settled for something way easier. Way easier. It's sex. And so that's why some battle with promiscuity and infidelity. Our verse said, fornication and adultery. That's why we settle for that, because the high that one experiences from a new sexual experience or from a new sexual conquest, it provides you with the illusion of love. It provides you with the illusion that you're being accepted. It provides you with the illusion that somebody is committing themselves to you, but it isn't the actuality of any of those things. Casual sex or illicit sex is not the actuality of authentic intimacy, because in time, when the whole self, the actual good, the bad, and the ugly of the whole naked self eventually gets undressed, as it inevitably will, right? It's time to bounce to a new bed. You ugly. You ugly. I don't like the naked you. I just like you naked. There's a big difference between the two. Casual sex is seeking for love, acceptance, and commitment, but it's settling for just plain old sex. That's the reason why, some of you teenagers here this morning will battle or are battling the temptation to become sexually active. You've been programmed to believe that sex is love. Sex is authentic love. So we love each other. We have feelings of love for each other. Therefore, we have sex. That's love. Well, we're tempted, at least, to be having sex. But you've been programmed to believe that sex is the expression of acceptance and commitment, but it is not. It's merely giving a piece of your body away. It's giving a piece of your soul away to someone who has not signed on the dotted line with you. Someone who has not made to you a solemn and holy oath that no matter what I discover about you, for the whole of your life, whatever good I discover about you, whatever ugly, whatever bad I discover about you, for the whole of your life, I will still love you and accept you and stick by you no matter what, till death do us part. Teenagers, that person that you have feelings of love for, that person that you're tempted to have sex with, is probably not willing to make that commitment at this point in time. And I would say they're certainly not able to make that commitment to you, to supply this essential ingredient of lifelong commitment that God designed to be an essential ingredient of authentic spiritual intimacy. The intimacy of commitment, and this applies to, sexually active, promiscuous adults. The intimacy of commitment is not present in mere sexual intensity, as much as you want to believe that it is. We're having sex, we're committed to one another. You're not. You're looking for somebody who will love the whole you, who will accept the whole you and be committed to the good, bad, and the ugly in you for a lifetime, but you've just settled for plain old sex. The two are not the same. It's the reason why we've seen a proliferation of activities such as sexting, people posting pictures of themselves online in various states of undress, or even immodesty in dress. I believe that those are all overt expressions of the God-given desire for the whole naked self to be known and loved and accepted. But in these activities like sexting and posting naked pictures of ourselves, we've reduced our whole naked self to nothing more than our private parts. You've confused, hey, look at the naked me. And you've confused that with, hey, look at me naked. You're looking for someone who will love, even the ugly parts of you that you want to conceal, but you've settled for somebody who merely lusts after the private parts of you that you should keep concealed. You've confused the buzz that you feel when someone wants to see more of you naked, and you've confused that with the authentic satisfaction of somebody who actually wants to see more of the naked you. You're seeking for God, but you've settled for sex. And I will argue, as I've done before, that even the proliferation of social media I believe, is an overt expression of the legitimate God-given desire for authentic spiritual intimacy. But many people on social media sites, instead of posting the pictures of their naked bodies, they're posting portraits of their naked selves. It's more like emotional exhibitionism, not physical exhibitionism, emotional exhibitionism. Hey, take a peek at my emotional private parts. What do you think? Like. Oh, people know me and they love me. All right. No, it's the illusion of being known. It's the illusion of being accepted. It's the illusion that I have disclosed the true, whole, naked self. But the fact is, I'm not sure why it's doing that, but the fact is the true naked self is hidden behind these carefully crafted virtual projections of the photoshopped self. And the acceptance that's at least believed in the like, is the illusion of acceptance. Because it's really, truly only the acceptance of the virtual, projected, photoshopped self, not the real self. You know, that's not authentic intimacy, that's fig leaf intimacy. We're hiding behind all these layers and believing that it's really authentic, whole, naked self-intimacy. So we're searching for authentic intimacy, but we've settled for exhibitionism. Men, you listen to me right now. The confusion between spiritual intimacy and sexual intensity is what lies behind a man's battles with lust, pornography, and infidelity. Listen to this. In a God-designed place in the masculine soul, we have a legitimate desire for the naked self to be known, to be loved, to be admired, and to be respected. We have a God-designed desire for our naked self, listen to this, in a sense, to assert itself into the world. And I mean that with the obvious overtones. We have a God-designed desire, need to assert ourselves into the world in a way that is loving, in a way that is self-giving, in a way that calls life out of the world around us. Not steals life, but gives life to the world around us through our act of selflessness. And then we also have, and listen to this carefully, then we have this God-designed desire, a legitimate God-designed desire to experience then in response to, our naked expression of divine masculinity. We have a desire to experience the response of, I respect you. I trust you. I will follow you. I will give to you my unguarded naked self. That's the way God made for it all to work. But men, we confuse all that with sex. And that's why we believe sex is all that. And so the battles with lust or battles with pornography are driven by confusing the image, the pornographic image, the illusion of a woman who wants nothing more in life than to abandon her unguarded self to us. And we've confused that pornographic fantasy with the legitimate need for acceptance and love and respect. We've confused lust for abandoned sex with the need for authentic intimacy. We've confused getting some with loving. We've confused getting some with being loved. We've confused the drive to cause an orgasm with the God-given need to actually, sacrificially and selflessly give ourselves away and actually love another person. We've confused sexual erection with just authentic, upright masculinity. We've confused sexual impact with the God-given need to actually make an impact in the world. We've confused the fantasy of hearing a woman's voice say, hey, big guy, with the God-given desire to hear God himself say to our hearts, hey, big guy. You are my beloved Son, and in you I am well pleased. Men were seeking for God. We've settled for sex. Women, I'm going to skate on thin ice here, but the confusion between spiritual intimacy and sexual intensity is what lies behind a woman's battle with fantasy, with emotional affairs, and I would suggest even behind the skyrocketing popularity of certain TV shows, TV series, movie series, and romance novels that are being called more and more mommy porn. You know what I'm talking about? See, in a God's designed place in the feminine soul, you have a desire for your naked self to be known, to be loved, to be accepted, to be pursued, to be safe in that pursuit, to be secure, to be committed to. God built that into you. And then for you, then, in response to being in this God-designed place of emotional safety and emotional pursuit, you have a God-designed desire to then envelop with love. And again, the obvious overtone is intentional. You have a God-designed desire to envelop with love, to envelop with warmth. And you have a God-designed power in that place of vulnerability to give birth to and to cradle and to nurture life in the world around you. But when you confuse God's design for authentic femininity with female sexuality, then these are the kinds of ways that plays itself out. You may confuse physical beauty. You may confuse just trying to be physically beautiful with the God-given desire to be valued, or physical desirability with the God-given desire to be pursued. You may confuse sexual attractiveness with the God-given desire for the whole of your naked self to be loved and accepted and found attractive, to be found beautiful. You may confuse being seductive, or you may confuse seduction with the God-given desire to be wanted, with the God-given desire to be pursued. You desire to know in your heart that you were freely and willingly wanted and freely and willingly chosen because the whole naked you was worthy of being wanted. But you may find yourself trying to secure that legitimate desire with sexual manipulation. And in so doing, confuse the legitimate power of being accepted with the illicit power of seduction. You may confuse sex with vulnerability. You may confuse superficial sexual vulnerability with authentic emotional vulnerability. You may confuse sexual abandonment with another as authentic disclosure to another, and authentically then being accepted by another, and maybe even on the authentic acceptance of another. You may confuse being dominated by a man or even being abused by a man with the false belief that you're experiencing God-designed authentic masculinity. On the other hand, you may confuse then being guarded and being self-protected and being shut down, and you may confuse that with your God-designed need for safety, for security. You may confuse romantic fantasy with marital intimacy. You may confuse the ecstatic illusion of being loved in your wholehearted nakedness by the perfect person, and confusing that with the joy of being imperfectly loved in your wholehearted nakedness by a real person. Women, in ways that you understand much better than I, obviously, you too may be seeking for God, but settling for sex. All right, well, I want to wrap this up here. We live in a sex-obsessed culture, out of control, and to some degree, and maybe to large degrees, we've been swept up in our cultural sexual obsession. We live confused. We're confused. We've confused our legitimate God-given need for spiritual intimacy with sexual intensity, and we've settled for sex because it's way easier. Sex is easier than love. Authentic intimacy is hard work. In fact, I would say authentic spiritual intimacy is impossible. Authentic intimacy is impossible because It's impossible for us, I should say, because it requires something that we don't have to offer others and something others don't have to offer us. And it goes way beyond just our anatomy. What we don't have to offer others, what others don't have to offer us, is unconditional love for the naked self, unconditional acceptance for the whole naked self, and unconditional commitment to the whole naked self. You understand that? And that's where the seeking for God part comes in. Because only in the Lord, only in Jesus Christ, and only in Him loving us in those ways, in His cross, selflessly, sacrificially giving His love to us, unconditionally, knowing even the worst of the ugly and the bad in us, He still unconditionally loved, accepted, and committed to us. And so only in the Lord do we have a source of unconditional, authentic spiritual intimacy. And so then only in the Lord do we have a resource to experience from God and from others, and to give to God, or give to God and to give to others, create the kind of intimacy for which God created us. And it's only then in the context, and this is just sort of a teaser statement, then it's only in the context of God designed and God resourced authentic spiritual intimacy then that good sex can happen. That authentic sexual intimacy, and maybe that's a much better way of saying it, because good sex in our culture we've reduced to just, right, the experience. But in the context of God-designed unconditional commitment, God-designed unconditional, love, and God-designed unconditional acceptance, it's only in that context that authentic sexual intimacy can be experienced. And we'll talk more about that in the weeks to come. So let's wrap it up there. Did we survive talk number 1? Everybody okay? All right. Let's stand. Let's have